The state of Florida is in the crosshairs for several programs: Bama, Florida, Georgia, Florida State, Miami, and others. Who is going where?
Locked On presents The Portal, the daily podcast covering college football recruiting and everything NIL. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back to the Portal Podcast, where you get your daily recruiting, NIL, and transfer portal scoop. I'm your host, Brian Smith, longtime college football writer and recruiting analyst. Thank you for making the Portal Podcast your first listen each and every day. Today's show is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Today's show is going to focus on the state of Florida. We've got a lot of kids about to make decisions. Some possible flips, including one player that just decommitted from Nebraska, probably going to stay inside the state, we think. And we're going to talk about the big three: Texas, Georgia, Alabama, all recruiting down there, and some kids from out of state that may be coming down south as well. To help me fix all these questions, Mr. John Garcia Jr. from Rivals.com. John, how you doing today?
Doing well, Brian. Just trying to keep up these days.
Nobody can do that. I'll go ahead and tell you, we're all failing there because everybody wants to decide within a 3-week window. It would be nice if we could have some congruency where everybody just spread it out, but that's not going to happen. So let's talk about the state of Florida, like a pivotal guy for each of the big three: Florida, Florida State, Miami. Let's just start with the Gators. When I saw CJ Brono decide to decommit from Nebraska, I went, uh-oh. The cornerback out of Windermere, which is basically Orlando, he is a sub-10 400-meter guy, electronic. He can fly, great kid. We've seen him at Under Armour. He was great that day that you and I saw him. Do we think Gators here? Is there somebody else? Is he going to take the visit anywhere else? Like, is he done? What are your thoughts on CJ Brono?
Look, CJ's been real quiet, understandably so from his standpoint, but let's go old school here, Brian. Let's track the visits, right? He visits Florida that first weekend of June and then goes right up to Nebraska. And at that point, June 7th or 8th, there was renewed optimism in Lincoln. Hey, we're going to battle, we're going to compete, and we're going to try to hold on to this kid. And at that point, it really felt like stick with Nebraska, flip to Florida. That was sort of the only scenario. He goes to Florida State this past weekend, enjoys the trip. I think the Seminoles are probably number 2 or 3 on the list right now. But then he goes back to Florida on Tuesday. Quick, unofficial visit. And this is a pattern we're starting to see with the Gators. Remember, they had Jarrell McCoy for an OV, and then after that, he canceled Texas, came back to Florida the next weekend before committing. Carson Baker, early official visit, goes through a couple others, returns for an unofficial visit to Gainesville, makes his commitment. So now in that pattern, CJ has taken the official visit, theoretically shutting down other trips, and returns for an unofficial visit to Gainesville. So I think this moves quickly for the Florida Gators. There's a lot of question marks around his scheduled visit to Penn State this weekend. As of this morning on Wednesday, I get the feeling he doesn't take that official visit, and this Gator commitment could be pending by the time people even see this recording. You know, I think it could happen at any point relative to those visits and how close to the vest CJ has kept this thing. So for me, decommitting from Nebraska officially really opens the door to make those phone calls and make it official with Billy Napier and company, which is another feather in the cap for that class. This was a group that we were down on, right? 1 or 2 commits in May total going into the official visit cycle, but now double-digit wins in June. And if Brono pops for the Gators, you could argue it's the biggest commitment that Florida has brought in during this stretch. I think, McCoy, some of these other guys are up there on the list. But in terms of the win, coming from behind, even with an in-state recruit, and staying in the game as CJ's profile became a national profile, right? With the track times, with the standout cornerback performances, the entire country got involved in this recruitment. So to be among those new programs to the mix and have the ability to keep him in state in the end, I think continues to reinforce that the closing ability of Billy Napier and this massive staff in Gainesville is something to be reckoned with.
What about Florida State? There's been buzz that Chauncey Kennan is going to end up being a Nole. I thought it was going to be Georgia for a while. Florida State is obviously the school that he grew up rooting for. He's not made that any secret at all. So is it going to be soon? Is Florida State really going to get him? Because they need some recruiting momentum. They did get a couple kids yesterday. Lavely, his older brother, plays at Florida State, and they got Crittenden, the defensive lineman out of Georgia as well. But is it going to be soon? And is Chauncey Kennan, you think, going to end up at Florida State?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do believe something happens soon with Kennan. He originally scheduled an early July verbal commitment date, but there's no doubt that Florida State holds that momentum. And even though there's been buzz, as you mentioned, for Georgia, Miami a few months ago had some buzz going for itself within state lines, the only school Kennan has come out and said leads is Florida State. And he's now done this at two different points. He did it early in the spring, I believe way back in February, and he did it coming off of his official visit in the month of June. So the Pat Surtain battery there, I think, resonates with him in particular. Look, he's a longer, leaner corner, sort of like Patrick Surtain II. So I'm sure Dad is selling that type of projection with Kennan, and it is resonating. There is a wild card here, though. Currently scheduled this weekend to go to LSU. And when it comes to big cornerbacks, Corey Raymond, the coach there in Baton Rouge, has been there and done that with a lot of names you and I have seen on Saturdays and plenty on Sundays as well. So I do think Chauncey wants to get that final look at LSU, a program, again, at that position that you really could never discount, late in the game for a recruit, even on short notice when other schools have held buzz. LSU's been able to snatch buzz with secondary recruits as long as you and I have been doing this. So certainly not going to overlook Corey Raymond's ability during an official visit with that intimate time. But right now, Florida State, the must-get uncommitted recruit, really nationally, is Chauncey Kennan, and he happens to be in state. And right now, I do have a prediction in for FSU.
All right, Garcia picking the Noles for Chauncey Kennan. What about the Hurricanes? There's a long list of kids they're still trying to get, but which guy would you say is the most important for them to get, and maybe somebody they can get soon?
In terms of Miami culture, I would begin the conversation with Brett College, the offensive lineman from IMG Academy. But this is a large group of suitors. As we record this right now, he's at USC for a midweek official visit. Going to Tennessee this weekend. He was just at Georgia, which might be the primary competition for the Hurricanes. Ohio State is in there. So this is a bigger and longer race. He wanted to decide later. Now probably looking at a July-August decision. So it could end somewhat soon. But in terms of the overall scope, I think Derek Cooper's the guy you got to focus on, right? When Miami is Miami and things are rolling, you keep the best local. And Cooper is the number one prospect out of South Florida in this 2026 cycle. So pivotal to keep him closer to home. Florida State just hosted him. They're moving up the list. Georgia hosted him this past weekend. That's really the school that Miami and many have felt is the true primary competition for Cooper. Of course, he made that brief commitment to Georgia about this time last year, right? Just as his profile went from regional to national. So there's a lot of love between both sides here. He spent his birthday in Athens. He just got the official visit done in Athens. So it's a legitimate hurdle for Miami to clear. But as that momentum has swung back and forth, it's been a little more orange and green than red and black in the last few weeks. So if that holds, that would be huge for the Hurricanes. And the only question becomes when. When does Cooper want to come off the board? He's got Ohio State scheduled this weekend. There was some buzz that maybe he doesn't take the trip and makes his commitment, which I think would have been great for Miami and Georgia. But it does look like, as we record this, that he'll take that visit to Columbus to see where the Buckeyes stand. And look, the defending national champs, he's a running back. We just saw what they did on the field in the draft, et cetera. So you understand why, the due diligence with the Buckeyes is still going to go down for Derek Cooper and company. But right now still has felt like a Miami-Georgia battle for quite some time. And the Hurricanes are obviously prioritizing him to try to keep him home.
When we come back, we're going to talk about Alabama. They're recruiting nationally. They just got a big-time quarterback out of all places, John, Nebraska. Well, we're going to talk about him. You and I both like him. We're going to talk about the Georgia Bulldogs and more here on this podcast. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building actual wealth. All-in-one convenience is something that we all like, and Monarch Money will allow you to do that with their app. You can track your spending, check your finances all in one place to get everything done in a timely fashion. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. All right. Thank you once again for making the Portal Podcast your first listen each and every day. We are available free wherever you get your pods. John, Jet Tamawa has committed to the Alabama Crimson Tide. Quarterback that I didn't know much about. He was committed to Iowa State. He's from the greater Omaha area. Then I saw that he was going to visit the Alabama Crimson Tide. When I saw that, I'm like, Iowa State's in trouble. And it didn't take long. He is now a part of Kalen DeBoer's class. We both have seen his film. Do you think this is a player that can play at Bama? And B, do you think this is the beginning of Alabama's so-called recruiting run?
Well, let me start with the latter point. Yes, this is the beginning of Alabama's recruiting run. It's been a quiet month in terms of tangible commitments, right? Ton of visitors, as you would imagine, to Tuscaloosa. But in terms of decisions, I think this is what gets the ball rolling in a pretty big way for the Crimson Tide. They've got a lot of guys looking at decisions in the very near future. They're going to strike on the West Coast. I know Jet Washington was just there. There's some buzz with the Crimson Tide there, but much closer to home, the Xavier Griffins of the world are sky high on the Crimson Tide. And then in-state, from number one running back Xavier Crowell to number one or number two receiver C.D. Morgan, elite pass rusher Tank Jones. I mean, Bama is going to win more battles than they lose among the names that I just listed. And even if they go 50-50, you're talking about 5 stars. You're talking about impact players that really move the needle now from a recruiting standpoint and into the future from a personnel standpoint. A lot of premium position guys listed there as well. So I do think this is the beginning of Alabama's run through official visit season. And what a starting point, right? I mean, Jet is a fascinating quarterback recruit. I actually saw some basketball clips before I ever watched his football clips. And he's not quite Riley Leonard with the athleticism and the dunking ability, but there is some breakaway dunking ability with Jet. You like those functional movement skills, and we do see them translate on the football field. There is a quick trigger and a live arm, yes, but when things do break down, he's incredibly comfortable making plays with his legs. He wants to extend to throw the football, but when he does tuck and run it, he's got some ability to pick up yardage in chunks. So he fits the modern mold and the modern asks of the position. But maybe my favorite thing, Brian, is looking at the production. He was better as a junior than he was as a sophomore. You expect that. But he was also better with just a few more attempts. Looks like 50 more attempts from one year to the next, yet you're talking nearly 1,000 more yards of production, 10 percentage points better from a completion percentage standpoint, and plus 19 in the touchdown mark while going -6 on the interception mark. So everything is trending positively for Jet from his first year as a starter to his second year as a starter. And that's the kind of trajectory that the very good quarterback evaluators really dial in on. And because if that keeps going, obviously this is a guy who's going to be incredibly comfortable and efficient at the next level. And obviously Kalen DeBoer likes that in his offense, even if it is a little bit more pass first, you still want that efficiency. So 70% completion percentage, 47 TDs against 3 picks. That will check boxes for a lot of quarterback evaluators. Throw in the athleticism. And again, that upside that feels like it's growing with time. And this is a really nice early eval for Iowa State, first of all. They deserve some credit here. But certainly Kalen DeBoer in Alabama for working this flip over quite some time. This wasn't a, hey, here's an offer, come visit, and then you flip. This was a longer period of work to go against the grain for that coaching staff. And obviously they just got it done. And it looks like this is a kid that will sort of grow on everyone that takes a closer look at him going forward, especially now that he's committed to Alabama. And I also think he deserves credit for trusting himself, right? We see it on the field with his arm. There's some plays where he's rolling right and throwing back left that you're like, no. Oh, it's a 40-yard completion. Obviously, you don't want to see that much at the next level, but it tells you he trusts his own physical traits. But walking into this quarterback room that has a lot of underclassmen and the number 1 player in the country from this past year in Keelan Russell at quarterback, walking into that quarterback room voluntarily, I do think says a lot about his own confidence and his own ability to either, buy into being developed, kind of an old school approach in this day and age at the quarterback position, because everyone else transfers after, 18 months, or his ability to say, you know what, I don't care if this was the number 1 player in the country and whoever wins this battle is going to be, going to have a good year by all indication, and maybe be a multi-year starter. I'm okay with all of that. I'm still going to go there and battle and compete and sort of bet on myself. So it would have been a lot smoother path to playing time at Iowa State as Rocco Beck winds down with the Cyclones than whatever's going on at Alabama, whether it's Russell, whether it's Mack, whether it's Simpson, whoever gets that job, it's a multi-year deal. So for him to go from that smooth path to a rocky one voluntarily, I do think says a lot about the kid. And that's the kind of, guy you want to build around, whether it's a recruiting class or eventually a quarterback room.
I agree with that. The Georgia Bulldogs are in on, it seems like, everybody. My question to you, John, which players for Georgia do you expect to pop soon? Like, that's probably the hardest question I'm going to ask you today, because they're in on, like, everybody. Derek Cooper in particular, I'm sure they're still trying their best to get what I think is as good a running back as there is in the country. But what are your insights on the Bulldogs?
Yeah, I think some of these offensive skill guys are looking pretty good for the Bulldogs. Craig Dandridge, the in-state wide receiver, I think he's getting close for UGA. He's sort of a kind of like Tamawa, a breakout prospect who every year starts to look better and better and becomes a Georgia take and priority within state lines. You mentioned Cooper. Look, there's a reason he committed there in the first place. It was funky. He didn't call everyone he needed to when he made that decision, but his decision was to roll with the Bulldogs. And a lot of that had to do with Georgia being one of the first programs okay with him as their running back. And he's a 5-star running back now, and it looks like, why wouldn't they be? But remember last year this time, Brian, a lot of people loved his defensive tape. He has safety, outside linebacker experience, that type of hybrid ability and speed and space with his kind of physicality is coveted on the defensive side of the ball. And Georgia was one of the premier programs that said, hey, come here, come run the rock. We got you. And that's one of the big elements that he bought into with that commitment a year ago. So it wouldn't be a shock if Cooper recommitted to Kirby Smart and company. So I think he's one to keep a close eye on as well. I think they're in on Jay Lamar on top of that at the running back position. I think Georgia wants to solidify that spot sooner rather than later. And then, on the offensive line, we mentioned Brett Coolidge just went there. I asked him how it was, and his first quote to me was, I freaking love Georgia. I mean, he just loves the work it would take to play at a program like that. And look, this is an IMG kid, a no-nonsense kid on the offensive line. You sort of understand that pipeline that has been built from IMG up to Athens, Georgia. And I think, coming out of that visit, it really feels like that's going to be a tough program to unseat for Breck as a premier interior offensive lineman. He said one of the things he loves about Georgia is just how darn hard it is. He loves the difficulty that it takes to get that offer, get into that program, and move up the depth chart in a program like that. So that type of mentality certainly fits that classic trench first, inside out mentality that Kirby Smart really thrives on. So I think that's a prospect that Georgia fans should also keep a very close eye on, among others. I do think, similar to Bama, this could be a nice run for Georgia here in the days and weeks to come at multiple positions.
Yeah, I think Georgia's in an interesting spot because they're in on so many guys. They're a threat for anybody. When we come back, we're going to talk about how many players are leaving the state of Florida, and one of the most, I would say, most unlikely schools to be pulling some of those players out of the state of Florida. That is next here on the Portal Podcast. All right, John, the state of Florida is a easy spot for everybody to get to. There's a million airports. Everybody wants to recruit it. But if you tell the average fan that the UCLA Bruins are on fire in the state of Florida right now, I'd imagine most of them would probably laugh at you. But it's actually true. What is it, 4 guys they got in like 10 days or something like that, 2 weeks? Like, where did that come from? And why is it that the kids in Florida are leaving and bypassing a lot of different schools, even down south, to go all the way to LA?
Yeah, talked to a couple of these guys in recent weeks. Santana Carlos, Micah Smith, the offensive lineman, who really had every scholarship offer there was. And it's this combination of, we talked about it a little bit with Jet Tamawa. There's a bit of bet on myself going on with this, combined with, hey, I'm a metropolitan Florida kid, and I think all 4 are, either Tampa, Orlando, Miami area guys. Here, let's go to LA and check it out. There's some similarities, there's some differences, but you could get the correlation from one coast to the next. And I think the youth on that staff, led by Deshaun Foster, is something that has resonated. And look, they're in the Big Ten. This is something that I think when it happened, you probably didn't put 2 and 2 together, like, oh, UCLA is going to sell that thing better than they ever have. But now, as the Big Ten has won the last 2 national titles, now you can start to really sell that, hey, it's Big Ten SEC or it's SEC Big Ten in either order, and you could really make that argument. So you're telling competitive kids from metro areas in Florida, hey, come to LA where NIL branding, marketing, the ceiling is sky high, right? There's not a great roster in place today. There could be a quicker path to playing time. Education box is checked in Sharpie in Westwood, and play in the Big Ten and bet on yourself as a dog against the best conference in college football. It's not just, hey, we're going to play USC every year and maybe we get Oregon on the schedule. It's a different sell for the Bruins. If things go the right way, you are in the playoff, you're playing Ohio State, you're playing Michigan, the list goes on and on. So it's always sold easily in the SEC. That's why the entire conference recruits the state of Florida, because you say, hey, go play against guys who are going to get drafted. And now UCLA, of all programs, can sell something like that. So I think all of those things combine really well for the Bruins. And they got guys from Florida who were extremely coveted. I think Champ Smith is a 5'2" offensive lineman. He can play pretty much anywhere. I think right tackle is going to be his home, but he could play up and down that offensive line. Johnny Jones is a massive human being from the Tampa area. I think he just transferred to Venice, but originally from the Tampa area. And then the 2 receivers complement one another. Santana Carlos, speedy, explosive slot receiver, bubble screen, get him the football, let him go. And then Xavier Stinson from Sarasota. He's a big physical boundary, sort of classic X body wide receiver 1 type. So you can fit these guys with each other just as much as selling it out to UCLA. So you get kids like that on campus, and you feel like you got more than a puncher's chance, and that's exactly what's lined up for the Bruins, who all of a sudden have a top 25 recruiting class. That's not something that I would have projected even a month ago, much less before that.
Yeah, I agree. It's wild with UCLA, but you know what? That's why you and I love college football. It's the greatest sport on earth because of all the little idiosyncrasies with culture, with the intersections of culture, like Vero Beach, where Champ is from, that's the one he's not really from a city, I would say. That's about as far away from LA as you can get. So we'll see what he thinks of it, but he's a great kid, and I think he can fit in anywhere. But that's cool, man. Like 4 guys, and they're still recruiting other kids on the East Coast and in Florida. So good for UCLA. But here's the other side of this. We touched on it a little bit earlier. Like Florida State is losing too many kids, in my opinion, that they want. Like they'd have taken Champ Smith in a heartbeat. I am confident in saying that.
Jones too.
Why isn't? Oh yeah. Like why in the world are so many kids bypassing not just like Florida State or whatever and leaving and just going? Do you think this is part of it just because of the internet age and all the access to information? Because when I was younger, literally 80% of the elite players, at least in the state of Florida, they stayed at one of the big 3, Miami, Florida State, period. Notre Dame might get a couple, or Nebraska, like Tommy Frazier. There was a few. But for the most part, those 3 dominated. It's only like 40% now. So what do you think it is?
It's a combination of things, right? I think the NIL standpoint is real. I think the presentation, local versus national, could be a stark difference, for some of these guys. And it's going to play better almost the further you are, from your home city or your home state. And then there's always been this sort of underlying desire for some guys, not all, for some guys to do something different. They've been to all the in-state schools. They've grown up around them, and there's this desire to try something outside the box, especially when there are so many examples in the last 10, 15 years of guys leaving the state of Florida and propelling their careers all the way to, top 10 first round draft pick status. So I think all of those recent, examples of precedent, I think those matter as well. I mean, look at a Jeremiah Smith, right? I mean, he's the case study that everyone's going to lean on for anything in college football. It's going as well as it could have possibly gone for him at the next level. And he's only a year in, right? So I think all of that stuff matters. And you also got to zoom out a little bit. And we say this all the time, and just remember the youth that is making these decisions, Brian. You or I understand each of those big 3 at their peak and multiple peaks, as good as it got in the sport, right? All 3 of them, right? These kids didn't live it. These kids, the last national title between the 3 was Jameis Winston in 2013. A lot of these kids were born, a couple years before that, if they're 16, 17 years old, right? So they don't remember. They don't have that physical, precedence of, hey, yeah, I remember, Jameis Winston throwing that slant to Kelvin Benjamin to win the Natty, and how crazy that season was for Florida State with the drama and the undefeated team, all that stuff. They don't remember it because they were children. They weren't maybe not even talking at that point. So I do think, when they think of the powers in the sport, the championship level programs in the sport, it's Ohio State, it's Georgia, it's Bama, it's Clemson, it's those programs, Notre Dame. I mean, those are the programs they view at a different clip. It's not all, but it's a big chunk because of the sheer facts that they're just young guys making these decisions. So all of those things factor in. But yeah, it's something that you can't imagine slows down in this era, even if 1, 2, or all 3 of the big 3 in Florida tighten up and get back to that mountaintop. It's that sell to leave is still going to be there, because as you mentioned at the top of the show, everybody and their mother recruits Florida, and that's just not going to stop. So all those elements do combine for that trend to continue. I'd be shocked if it even slows down a little bit in the next, few years.
Yeah, I agree with you. The big 3 have to figure that out, because they're not going to get back to where they want to be without keeping more of them home, Florida State in particular. John, tell everybody where they can find your work.
Yes, sir. Rivals.com. A lot going on right now. Elite 11. We've got the 5-star event coming up, OT7 after that. So in between all these commitments, we'll see a lot of these guys live. So it's a fun time to check us out at Rivals.com.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir. You can find the Portal Podcast wherever you get your podcasts for free and on YouTube. Thank you for checking us out. We'll see you again soon on the Portal Podcast.